All right, let's go ahead and get started with this evening's garden planning and seed selection webinar. It's going to be presented by Carol Palmer. Carol, I'll go ahead and turn the screen over to you.
Everybody. Carol Palmer Yiddish, Irish Nishli, Swedish Bashashin, Scottish Dashiche, Bishpichai, no Navajo clans. But I have been living in this region for a long time. Been on Navajo since 2004. And so I really appreciate being asked to share this information with you. I know that there's a lot of experience out there and a lot of different ways to approach things. So this is really intended to be a forum to just brainstorm and have ideas, and not, and it's not about doing it my way or anybody's way. So again, thank you. And oh yeah, just wanted to pop in, the donut seeds, very important seed selection. So a little bit about my employer. I work for the COPE program currently, and that within COPE, it's a public health nonprofit organization, and we have a food access program where we really try to stress that food is medicine. With a Healthy Navajo Stores initiative, which supports the healthy food tax, the fruit and vegetable prescription program, and then I work most directly with the Growers Initiative. And I'm sorry if I'm making a little noise here. I have an elderly dog that has decided she needs to go outside, so I'm letting her out. Okay. So I work with Farm to School and school groups, and then also Grow the Growers. And with COVID, things has been an adventure, but this is where we are. So those of you that like to plant, I think you would probably relate to this. The gardening season officially begins on January 1st and ends on December 31st. We know that's not true, but that's how we kind of tend to think things sometimes. It's good that we have the seasons that we take a break, but sometimes you're always thinking about it, and when the weather warms up, we're ready to get rolling. But one thing I was really fortunate to have shared with me very early on after I moved up to Navajo Nation was this, the Navajo way of thinking and education and philosophy and the heart of all of it. And that it's not just about the Western way of just be like Nike and just do it. We're thinking and then planning and then doing it, and that's only 1/4 of the circle, and then the result, the celebration. So, and especially the idea that, especially when we're talking about gardening and farming and things, that was something that involved family and that involved community. It wasn't just one person flying solo. So really the idea of doing things together, you just want that to be a part of the thought process as people are moving forward with this idea of planning a garden. So again, the word planning has two N's in preparation, and then we get to planting with a T. So planning is really important because we've had crazy ups and downs with our lives the past couple of years, lots of things to consider. And most people have a lot of other things to do, and so priorities can shift in a heartbeat. So really planning is really important. So of course we're in a technology age, and there's an app for that. There's a lot of apps for that, and I'm really not going to talk about them because I think in some ways they just clutter things up. So if you're really a techie geek and really into it, this one, the Grow Veg one, it gets offered through different companies as well on the US side. But it's all about just making your garden layout and putting things where you might want to plant them on a visual board. So it's a little clunky to work with. Probably even playing around with something like Jamboard would be more fun. But one of the things I wanted to point out about this app and then about all the other apps out there is that if you look at the very bottom of this screen, if you're able to see that, it's kind of small, but it has regional versions, US, Canada, United Kingdom and Europe, Australia, New Zealand, and South Africa. This is very much a British-based program. and they come from that mentality. But even with that, the people that most of the advice and most of the information that is included in these apps are really based for people that, oh, I don't know, have rain more often than we do and have very different weather conditions, have very different soils and things like that. So the apps are cool and they're fun to play with. And just like all the books out there, there's a lot of information out there, but you really have to really do some weeding before you start gardening and weed through and pick out what's going to be good and worthwhile. So really, the main thing I want you to think about is, why do you want to have a garden? What is your purpose? Um, there are lots and lots of reasons to do it. And then once you know really why is it in your heart to do this and why are you going to put the time and energy into it, then you need to look at all the pieces and parts of the puzzle that need to be in place to be successful. So how easy is it to get to your garden? It used to be traditional to not have things planted close to the house. That has been changing as people have adapted to different ways of doing things and having it close to the house. I originally worked at St. Michael's Association for Special Education, so I'm also thinking about access in terms of how easy is it to walk around? How easy is it to do things? Am I going to trip over things? So those that kind of access as well. And then, is there shade? Is there shelter? I think there are a lot of community garden projects which are really cool, but they don't have a place to gather as a community. There's no little place to sit. There's no shelter. Where is the sun? Where do you want to have your garden as opposed to where the sun is? And do the things you want to grow really like a lot of sunlight, or do they prefer more shade? What's your water situation? This is key. How's your soil? And then what's the noise like? What's the wind like? Are there existing plants, buildings? What's the security? Animals, fencing, two-legged animals that might get in? And then again, back to your purpose. Is this for community? Is this for your own therapy and your heart? Do you want to have an artsy looking garden? Is it educational? Do you want to do a lot of traditional things and keep those things going? So it's just a lot of stuff that, again, the thinking and the planning is really the major part. Okay, I think I clicked, there we go. Okay, so, and then the other thing to consider is just that we're facing a lot of challenges and a lot of changes, and part of that is climate change, and that's going to affect what we do and when we do it and how we do it. So this is a photo that's from where I used to live in St. Michael's, a hummingbird feeder with a little hummingbird on it, but that was May 16th. And so we've already had a couple ups and downs with nice weather, and then I'm at 7,000 feet now. I live in the New Mexico side, east of Gallup, in Jamestown. And so I just had snow last week, and there's supposed to be more coming. So these are more reasons to plan. If I wanted to have a garden early, I need to plan whether I'm going to get snowed on or hailed on or whatever else. So one of the things that you'll often hear in Lasagna Gardening world is the idea of the last frost date. This was not something that was necessarily part of traditional teachings, but I discovered that in my ancestry, again, my clans are Irish, Swedish, Scottish, and German, and somebody back on the other side of the pond in Europe, the tradition was, if it was warm enough to sit on the ground with a naked butt, then it was warm enough to plant. So, think about that. The temperatures are important and the frost is important depending on what you want to grow. So knowing when is it going to snow, when is it going to get cold. And so that just means around here, the last frost dates can be anywhere from the middle of April or late April if you're up around San Juan County and out in the drier parts of the res, or if you're up more in the mountains and up in higher elevation like I am, then I've had frost on Memorial Day weekend at the end of May, and even into June. So these are things to consider when you're planning. We're planning. And then the soil. We want soil that's healthy and happy, habitat for roots. And there's been a lot more promotion on that. NRCS has been really active in talking about good soil and healthy soil. And we're hearing a lot more about the life in the soil and the soil microbes. And so these are things to consider. And you don't necessarily want to go spend all your money on bags of soil from the store. It's out there, it's available, it's a great resource, but there are a lot of considerations. So what's your budget for that? So one of the resources on the res and in this region is manure. But if you want to use manure in your garden, you want old manure. So now is the time, if you haven't already done it, you could be putting manure out there in your garden beds, because ideally you want to have it at least 120 days old, which is 4 months old, if you want to think of it that way. So from now in February, March, April, May, and June, you could be planting by June, but ideally, if the hotter the manure, the more likely it is to burn your plants and burn your seeds and have bad bacteria. So old manure. So again, planning ahead, if you're going to use it, you want to be aware of some of the health issues around it. Oops, I'm off on my screen again. Okay, and then of course, life is simple, just add water. Well, that's not so easy around here. And you may be on NTUA water and not really like that water and have to do some things about that. Or you may have well water or city water, or you may be hauling water. So where other people have so much rain and their gardens just grow, that's not something that we can just expect to happen here. So having a watering strategy is really important. So what are you going to do? How are you going to do it? And how much water do your plants need that you want to grow? So, and it's not practical to be watering every day, every day, every day. So again, this is where working with the soil and other things are going to make a difference. So the other thing, and you can tell that soil is a little dry out there. So wind, what's your strategy for dealing with wind? Are you in an area where what you're going to plant is just going to get blown away very quickly or dried out very quickly by the wind? Do you have a way to create a windbreak or some wind, or can you plan your garden in such a way that it's protected by a building or protected by bushes or trees or something? When I was developing my garden, when I was in St. Michael's, there was a lot of rabbit brush there, and I left a lot of it around the edges of the garden so that it could be a windbreak for the things that I planted. So planning, planning, planning. How are we going to do this? So one strategy that a lot of people like to use is the idea of raised beds. And so this is something because it simplifies things. Jesse was saying that next month there's going to be the speaker is going to talk about container gardening. And so raised bed is really another form of a container garden. And it's because there's a lot of ways. The thing with gardening and farming is that we feel like this is our way that we can have some control over the environment, but a lot of times we don't. And so we may need to critter proof things and keep the rabbits away and the prairie dogs and all that. So that's a way to do it. But I really get tired of just the boxes. And I think we've got a lot of creative people around here, and there are easy ways to get around that. So if you're going to do boxes, cool, but do something colorful, make it interesting, make it a fun box. Don't just have a box out there. You can make them into T shapes or other than that. If you're going to have boxes, put a trellis in between them. Are you going to grow squash or melons or beans or anything like that? Flowers that climb. You can make it a cool space. And again, this is the planning. If you're going to construct something like this, you want to be doing it in the off season, not when you're ready to plant. So you've got time now. You can be thinking about different ways to do things. This is a fun little raised bed, and it's kind of hogan shaped, but it's got that entrance and then different sections for planting different things. So it doesn't have to be rows and lines, of things. You can make it personal, make it something that you enjoy being in, that it's again, healing for you, and that you're producing food with love and a good heart for your family and your community. If you don't like boxes and wood and lumber, you can use rocks. This is over in front of the Department of Ag in Window Rock a few years ago. And all those rocks came from the summit and were hauled down to build the bed there. So it's a raised bed, and it's not raised very high, but it's just high enough to separate it from a lot of the weeds and things, and to be able to add things to the soil to make a better soil for all of those. It's mostly flowers. It's a pollinator garden. Doesn't look as good right now because it's off season and it's been a rough couple of years, but these are the kinds of things that you can be thinking about. This is another garden made of rocks, and it's a spiral garden. This one was up at the clinic up by near Dene College, Wheatfields. And so at that one time there was a garden being developed there. And so these are just, again, big rocks that were hauled from various places around the area. And that took a lot of strength and a lot of thinking and figuring out and taking time to do that. But it's a really beautiful result to be able to create this spiral. The rocks were made into a spiral and then elevated slightly for a raised bed, and then planted with flowers and some herbs. And so pretty neat thing. But again, something that you can't just slap together. You need to think about it and have people help you. So this is another spiral. This is when I was at St. Michael's Association for Special Education many years ago. We did this. And this is cattle panels and T-posts, so not that complicated, and we made it wide enough so that it could be accessible for wheelchairs as well. So again, access has many different definitions. But the nice thing about this is you think about the pathway versus where things are planted. The plants were planted right at the base of where the cattle panel and the T-posts are. So that's the only place that we had to worry about watering. That's where we had to worry about working with the soil. We didn't have to worry about the area where people were walking. So it was a little complicated to set it up, but then it was a lot easier to maintain it. And so that's part of the thinking and planning process, is you might put a lot of work into the upfront to make your life easier as you go along. So this is another example of something that's not a square, and it's just stacks of, actually, I think that's flashing that got put into those circles. But the idea again is that planning ahead, it's a format that can be protected from birds eating the little baby seedlings. I mean, how often have any of us planted something and then you're starting to sprout and you're all excited and then something gets it? So thinking and planning, what are you going to do? What are you going to plant, and how are you going to protect it? Back on my screen. There we go. Okay, and then again, if you're doing things, sure, you might have squares, but if you're gardening with kids or even for yourself, do you want to have a tunnel? Do you want to have arches? A lot of plants appreciate having things to climb on, but it can also be something that's fun for people. So putting a bigger arch in the garden can be great. Like, that's where kettle panels are really great, because they're heavy enough. They're sturdy in the wind, the kind of winds that we get. Some of those lightweight things are not that practical for us, but there's a lot of ideas and things, a lot of things out there. And then some areas, some parts of the res, there are issues with chemicals in the ground. There are also issues with chemicals on some of the materials that we might use to create our gardens. And so that's where, if you're doing a raised bed, or again, thinking ahead and planning what you're going to do and how you're going to do it, you have time to consider, and you can line the garden bed so that whatever you plant is not in direct contact with any other material that you might be concerned about. So this is an example of those raised beds, but these rectangles have been made into a U shape. So it's boxes, but it's a better looking box in my opinion. That's just me. But they've used cardboard to put on the bottom to keep the grass out. They've got grass where they are, but you can use that against weeds, knapweed, bindweed, that sort of thing. And then plastic on the sides is a liner. So one approach to building up your soil is called lasagna gardening, and you may have heard of this. And it's just the idea of, it's not planting tomatoes and um, zucchini and eggplant or whatever you might like in your lasagna. It's about layering things to create a garden bed. And that's where the lasagna comes from. Hopefully you've already eaten, or you're eating right now as you're listening. And that doesn't make you hungry. But if you've ever looked into composting at all, you will have seen that composting really talks about having browns and greens. So the browns being usually the dried up stuff, whereas the greens are the fresher materials. And then between those two, the chemical reactions cause everything to decompose, and it creates really beautiful garden soil and all those kinds of things. So lasagna gardening is a way to create a garden bed where you're basically composting in place with your garden bed. And then and you can plant in it pretty much right away, depending on how you set it up. But then each year you just add more stuff on top. You're not starting from scratch every year. You're building up your soil and your bed every year. So critters, again, if you're doing raised beds, or if you have time to think about how are you going to protect things from critters, if you're going to make a box, put a liner in it. If you're going to use chicken wire, all the prices are going up on things. Do a double, triple layer of that. Put in cardboard as well. There are strategies. There are gonna be more webinars about some of these other strategies in more detail. So I'm just giving you things to think about based on what you want to do. There's our little friend, a prairie dog. Brought you a flower, but I ate it. So, but this is the thing. I see a lot of prairie dog hate out there, which makes me sad, because they really used to be more of an integrated part of this region, and they're considered what is called a keystone species. They should not be as low numbers as they are, but they created a lot of habitat for other animals behind them. And a lot of Navajo words have the prairie dog word within them from back in the day. So again, these critters that are out there, how can we work with them and not feel like we're always in a battle? And so now in the off season, this is your time to think about that and think about what you can do to make it a harmonious and a happy garden, for that there's room for everybody in their own way. Traditional planting. So again, these are things that some of these traditions are not being practiced to the degree that they were for a lot of different reasons. But if it's something that you want to do, then it's time to think about how you would want to approach it, and who can you talk to about it, or who can you share ideas with, getting your family involved, things like that. One of the things about traditional planting in the soil is that a lot of people will also garden for pollinators. And so that little guy in the squash blossom there is a squash bee. And one thing that people don't realize when they're thinking about their gardens, and why one of the reasons that there's so much of an emphasis now on not tilling the soil, is because something like a squash bee and other native bees, they don't do like the European honeybees. They don't make hives and they don't build nests like that. Their nest is underground. They do that instead. And so if you're doing a lot of tilling and just turning up the soil all the time, you're gonna destroy all these baby bees, because the females will lay the eggs, the larvae, in the end of the summer, the fall, and they overwinter. The babies are developing over the winter, and then they're coming out when the weather is warming up, which is exactly when everybody's tilling. So again, something to think about. If you want to plant squash, you can do it in containers as well. You can do it in raised beds as well. But there are reasons why that Western way of tilling, it may be efficient, and it may have uses on a larger scale where we've benefited from that approach. But in terms of the bigger picture of our world and how we share the planet, where we need to rethink some of those approaches. And so this is something that you can do with your own garden and your own practices thinking about what are these and looking for those kind of little holes around the squash to see if they are there. Because if it doesn't get pollinated, part of the reason that people want to plant pollinator gardens and attract the bees and other pollinators is that a lot of people like watermelon, and watermelons are like squash. They have separate male and female flowers. And so the female flowers are only open for a few hours on one day, and it has to be visited by, it has to receive 500 to 1,000 pollen grains. So that's a lot of visits from a fly or a bee or a butterfly or a hummingbird or whatever the critter is that's helping with the pollination. Wind can help a little bit, but this is a lot of activity, and you want to encourage that activity. So again, thinking, planning, and knowing what to expect and what to prepare for. So this is just an idea of a bed that I did because I was trying to figure out a way to do a raised bed and compost. And so this is an overhead view, like you're flying over and looking at it from the top. So it's kind of a keyhole. I liked it too because to me it reminds me of the Navajo basket in that traditional way. So I incorporated it, but it's similar to the lasagna gardening that you're putting bigger things at the bottom, logs and rocks and stuff like that, and then you're building up essentially a compost pile, but then you have an active compost tower in the middle of it. So it's an interesting approach, something different. But this was the one that I created here at my home last year, so it's still a work in progress. But I was trying to think again ways that it would work for me and how it could be functional. And so I just used materials I had. I had some old fencing and I used cardboard and all kinds of things. And so, but that took me a lot of time to do. And I really had to make the time and plan and work on it before I could ever plant anything in it. But now that it's there, now I just have to maintain it. And it's a lot easier for me. And those posts are there so that I can ideally put smaller PVCs in those. They're hollow 1.5-inch PVCs. And then that way I could put a shade cloth over it or whatever I need. But again, thinking and planning. If you don't want to think that much, some people will even garden in a bag and then put a little compost thing in the middle of that. So again, not trying to make you overthink things or work too hard. There's a lot of simple things that can be done. Again, when you have the container gardening webinar next month, I'm sure she'll touch on a lot of that, but it doesn't have to be boring. We can cutesy things up. There's good grief with Instagram and Pinterest and all the social media out there. There's ideas all day long. And so it's just a question of what's going to appeal to you and make you smile and be practical for you. So you even see things about gardening in a laundry basket. And so this is where we can encourage our families and our kids to recycle. There's some trashed laundry baskets that could be reused. They might only last a season or two because our sun is pretty intense, but it was a kind of a fun idea and it's something to try. And again, everything doesn't have to be an immediate success. It's a learning process and it's experimentation. And so hopefully that's going to be something that's fun and that you can enjoy. But just even planning in a sterilite container is doable. And so this is something that I also like to do because you can set it up for watering and what's called a self-watering container. And I saw they do have a couple of those at Home Depot and Gallup, I just noticed, but the official ones can be really expensive, but there's tons of information out there about how to create your own. And again, watering is a really big issue. And so if you have something that can hold water underneath for the plants that you've got in your container, it can be a really successful strategy. I have still creating containers like that at my house. And so it's nice because I only have to water once a week, maybe twice if it's super hot. It just depends. So this is just showing the anatomy of one approach to just taking a sterilite. So you're not, there's no holes in the bottom of the container because it's holding water, but there is a hole in the side for overflow of water so that you don't have just a big bucket of water and soil and mud. And so anyway, it's a fun approach. So again, water is just so important here, and water is life. So we want to be respectful and really think about, again, how to do this in a good way. So if you've got um, soil that the water just bounces out off of right now, then the more you work with that and amend that, think about the mountain soil and how that is and how that really soaks up water, because it's just got those conditions in place and those microbes in place. And how can we do that in our own area? So think about how you're going to water, when you're going to water, and learn more about that. And then mulch, 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 and that'll be something that you hear more about. But that's just a material that you put over the top, the keyhole bed that I showed you. If you let me go back just quickly, so that white material on the top there, kind of creamy white. Um, if anybody can't guess what that is, it's wool, and that's what I've started to use as mulch, because that's something that's really good for the plants. But wood chips, or even more compost, there are a lot of things. And then Jesse will tell you I like to use Oyas. These are the clay version, but the idea is that you have water underground in a container that then slowly delivers water to your plants at the root level. And so I use plastic bottles for this. Again, that's something more. And then rainwater harvesting, if it's something that you want to do, those are the kinds of things that require thinking and planning. And then again, do you need a trellis? What's going to be growing there? Does it all fit together? So it's just another example from my house. These are self-watering containers that I made with some containers I got at Walmart many years ago. But I've made a trellis out of PEX pipe and PVC for the tomato plants that are in those. And again, I want my garden to also make me smile and to be more creative. And so I really looked into different ideas that were out there and came up with the ones that I liked. And I'm still working with them, but it's just things that I wanted to do. So the other piece of this is, again, there are so many things that you can plant. And now is a good time to be thinking about, well, what are those things? Are there only 2 or 3 things that I want to do? Or do I want to have a whole bunch of different kinds of, every different kind of squash that I could possibly grow? And what would that be? So you hear people say cool season or warm season, or how much space do they need? Or what's the day length? This is something you hear about with onions. But right now, even if you had a greenhouse that was really, everything was perfect, tomatoes and peppers and things would not want to grow without a lot of artificial light, because they're sensitive to day lengths to produce their flowers. How many days until harvest? I could have 3 different tomato plants, and one tomato plant could be something that produces very quickly in a couple of months, maybe 3 months. Another one could take longer, and one could take so long that I'd never even get a tomato from it. Corn is like that. That's why people also plant corn at different times, so that it's not pollinating at the same time and it doesn't cross the colors as much. So those are things to really be learning about what you want to plant. But the most important thing is, what do you eat? What is your family like? Sometimes people will pick something up because it looks cool or they want to try it, but then it turns out nobody likes it. And these days, time is precious, and money is precious, and the amount of energy we put into this, again, we want to be doing this with a good heart. So it's important to really think these things through, and not just be attracted by the fact that now if you go to Walmart or Home Depot or any of those stores, you'll see racks of seeds and everything looks great and it's all exciting, but it's still, today is February 22nd of 2022. So happy 2/2/2/2/2. So sources of seeds and things to do is just start learning from other people who are growing. And so for those that are in the San Juan County area, there's a gal that started developing a seed savers group some years ago, Beverly Todd. And so now it's built up to the point where they're developing a community seed library. And it's now being housed at the new San Juan Soil and Water Conservation District building. And they're actually going to have a meeting this Thursday. So if you're in that area, it'll be easy for you to get. But they have a Facebook, and I know a lot of people do Facebook, so you can check into it that way. But it's just good to talk to people. And so these are seeds that have been, some seeds are seeds that have been donated that could have been, could come from anywhere. But for the most part, they're really trying to grow seeds during the season that can then be shared out the next growing season. And so these are seeds just like all the traditional seeds that people used to save and share. They're used to this environment. They're used to this water that we have, this soil that we have. They've adapted, they've adjusted. And so they're smarter about it than some seed that you might buy off of the rack at the store that maybe somebody grew in Iowa or even in Europe or somewhere else in the world. So another seed exchange program, and I'm not sure how active they've been because of COVID, but I know that it was intended to be an ongoing program. So Cibola County Cooperative Extension over near the Duck Pond now in Grants is a place where there's also a seed library. So if that's something you're interested in, you can contact Chase Elkins and ask what's happening if there are seeds available. But both of those sources, the Cibola Seed Savers and the Cibola County one, those are both free seeds. And I know that a lot of people used to depend on New Dawn for that, and I really don't know with COVID how easy it's been for them to get seeds out to communities. And there are a lot of choices out there. So with these other groups, you have the opportunity to, again, talk to other gardeners and people who have grown things and see what they liked and didn't like, and share tips and all that, because that's really what it's all about, is that community. One of the famous ones out there is Native Seed Search down in Tucson, and they have a free seed program for Native Americans, especially from this region. So that's something to look into. And there's a guy that used to be a part of it, and now he has his PhD, so he's Dr. Nicholas Garber, but he's somebody that is very concerned with making sure that seeds that have been maintained by the Native Seed Search Program get back out to their communities that they're originally from, to their homelands. So this is a really good program to look into. But if you want to have specifically Navajo seeds, I'm guessing that most in this area we're talking Navajo, and so I only found a couple things in the program. A lot of their other seeds are cool, but they might be from low desert tribes, Pascoyaqui, or even Mexico, different people. So these are seeds, and so this is something to think about, again, planning ahead. Our original seed was obtained from a melon entered in the Navajo Nation Fair in Shiprock. So if you want to say, have seeds that are, and start building up your own traditional seeds, then this season, if you haven't already done so, and once things start coming available, get some shiprock melons, get some squash, get some things that you can save the seeds from to start building up and getting them used to your own place. It's surprising to me how many people still want to get a seed in a packet or in a bag and not really think about, well, it originally actually came from this fruit, so I can get it that way too. Another really good group to look into is Seed Savers. This is their commercial site as far as that goes, but they do also have an exchange program that you can get involved with, where there are people all over who are growing out different kinds of things and then exchanging them and selling them, whatever works. If you're not exchanging things yet, then money is still the bartering tool, but it's got a really good mission. And so one of the fun things about these websites too is if you're not sure, so I picked arugula just because. So just, again, as far as seed selection, one of the things to look at when you're looking at that is, well, what's the information that's provided? What can I find out about it? And so I know that for my $3.75, I can get 500 seeds. If I want to spend $8, I get a quarter of an ounce, which is a lot of little tiny seeds. But on their website, the Seed Savers website, it also talks about how to grow it. And it talks a little bit more about it. Improved Dutch strain, can be harvested 3 to 5 times because you can cut it and then it comes back. So 40 to 45 days before you get some arugula. I'm not a huge arugula fan, but it's something that is very tough and a lot of people like it in their salads and such. But it even also tells you how to seed it, how to plant it and what the seed depth is and thinning and all that kind of stuff. So much information out there. So it's really important again to be thinking and planning now so you know what to do. And I just looked into, there's a couple of small companies that I like to check out their websites and order from if I'm going to order seeds. And so things to think about: January through March is a busy season. Orders may take up to 2 weeks, blah, blah, blah. And so when COVID hit, a lot of these little seed companies just got slammed because everybody was panicking and in fear. And so buying seeds thinking that they could just live off the land. And that didn't quite work out as everybody was thinking. But why I like these guys is that they're in Utah. And so their growing conditions and their soils are very similar to ours in this area. And especially for those of you that are in a lower area than I am, it's going to be more comparable, some of the seeds they have. So those are seeds that are, again, adapted and more likely to be successful than something that I buy that might have had its origins in New York or California or something. So just an example of one of their products, Wild West Kale. And again, so kale, we have all heard about kale. It grows really well here. Like it or hate it, it grows really well for us. So they've got one where they've mixed it and they've been selecting it every year. They've been working for several years to create a kale that they like that grows really well here. So, and I also thought it was cute to say our seeds are happy, non-GMO, untreated, patent-free, and cutie patootie certified. Not very many people say that. No chemical fertilizers, pesticides, or herbicides. So again, I think we've gotten away from in this industrialization of agriculture is that humanity and that personality. And so, these are some of these people are people that you could get to know. That's just an example of kale tolerating frost. And we'll talk more about that in a minute. High Desert Seed and Gardens. This is a collective, mostly gardens, farmers in Colorado. And so hardy seed for hardy souls, diverse resilient seed for high desert regions and beyond. So again, things that are going to be tough and things that are going to be just not too much little diva plants that are going to need your attention every minute. So people talk about planting beans, and there are a lot of other kinds of beans besides pinto beans. So this is one that was originally more commonly found in the region than it is now, but it should grow well. And so, but it takes 100 days, it says down there. So 100 days from the time you plant that bean seed to the time that you would get dry beans. So you got to make sure that your weather is going to accommodate that. But these were grown by Gray Owl Gardens in Peonies. So again, more of a personal touch, and I like that. Miss Penn's Mountain Seeds, she's in Colorado, and Wild Mountain Garden, she's at 8,000 feet. So she likes tomatoes. She's got other things, but again, looking at for our short season, something early Russia determinate, which means that it doesn't grow into a vine. It just stays like a bush. But you can research and find things out about certain plants and not just get the ones that they have at the store, but start developing your own and start creating some and saving seeds and creating some varieties that are going to be do really well here. That's what our ancestors did. That's what the people here did. My ancestors weren't here, but all of those varieties of corn and squash and peppers and things that have been here for hundreds and thousands of years are here because people selected them and grew them, and they didn't have all the fancy equipment that we could use today to do that. And so these are really tough seeds. So again, and she even has a bucket mix that's just all the seeds that she collected that she forgot which one was which. And so if you get some of these seeds, who knows what you're going to end up with. So that's kind of a mystery adventure there. But I liked the idea of planting seeds is very healing and hopeful, gives you clean food and a happy heart. So from our mountain to all of you, be well and thank you. And again, I think when we're going into this and spending our time on this, we want to make sure that we do it in a good way. Traditional Navajo way is to have songs and prayers, and a lot of those have been lost. But that doesn't mean that people can't come up with new ones or adapt some that they know and just keep that tradition going, because it's key to the whole process. But if you've really got a plant, I'd like you to think about it. I like to compare it to um, some of the traditional plants that were not planted from seed and grown in a field, but that people would go out and gather. And those are going to start popping up in the next few weeks. But to the left there, you'll see wild onions. And those are up from by Hogback area, but I have them here even where I am at 7,000 feet. I have wild onions. So that's something that comes up in the wild when the weather is still cold, or what we would call the wild. But it's something that Belaganas would plant 6 weeks before that last frost date. So for me, I could start planting onions and be confident about it maybe by the middle of April for where I am. So that's something that's going to depend on how warm it is where you are. And maybe it would need to be protected, but less so than other things. And then for the greens, so wild spinach and wild parsley start popping up. So 5 weeks before the last frost date, kale, spinach, turnips, mustard. And then things like wild carrot will come up when the weather is still cold. We should be seeing that fairly soon. And so the root vegetables and English peas, but carrots, beets, radishes, those are the same kinds of things. And then as it gets warmer, then lettuce and Swiss chard. So you can think about, what happens in nature and the plants that people used to really harvest and rely on. They're related. They're cousins to plants that people buy seeds for and plant now. And so those are also clues that you can be watching for when you're starting to get a little bit excited about, oh, I want to plant, I want to plant. Well, is it popping up yet around you or not? And so this is the kind of knowledge that people used to have that we just don't pay much attention and we don't know anymore. So again, we get teased, we think it's warm, and then it snows or it's cold. But again, traditional Navajo way, we're way away from traditional planting time. A lot of people would go by the stars, by the sisters, the Dilgehe. And so that's something that does not take place until May. We're a little ways away from May. And then another thing, just again, to encourage you, the idea that I found this quote and I just really thought it was something to think about. My grandfather used to say that once in your life, you need a doctor, a lawyer, a policeman, and a preacher. But every day, 3 times a day, you'll need a farmer. And we'll include the ranchers in that too. We don't want to leave them out. But I think we forget how important it is. And so this getting back in touch with growing our own food and food for our families and our communities is just something that's really valuable. And so for me, I want to grow my own food, but I can't find any bacon seeds. So thank you. And I don't know if any questions popped up yet, but I didn't hear anybody interrupting. So I will exit out of here. Stop sharing. Stop share. There we go. Okay.
I have a question, Carol.
Yes.
This is Mikkel. So my family and I, we recently, well, I guess we've been planning for a while, but just one particular crop, which is corn. And what we have been having problems with is it's windy out here. And like have you mentioned from the beginning of your presentation is to try and plant where you will like have windbreakers. We chose an area where there's like no trees, no bushes, and our barn is just not as close to our garden as possible where it can be a windbreaker. We do try to put in soil and the topsoil with our plants, but they end up blowing away. So I'm not sure what other suggestions to do in order to keep that topsoil within each of our plants. If you know a way, that would be really helpful.
Well, so the challenge with that, I totally get that, because this is the thing. So another thing to keep in mind is, again, this situation that we're in now is very recent in terms of history. It used to be before the colonial invasion that, happened. People would not be in the same place. You didn't have your home site in your little fixed area that you were in. People moved around, and so you could move around to areas that were better for planting. And so this is something where now you can't, and it is what it is. So and it's not like you can just pick up and move everything to some other, it just doesn't, it's not practical, it doesn't make sense. So how do you work with where you're at? And it's something, it doesn't have to be done all at once, but if there are ways to create windbreaks out of materials that are more easily available, like pallets, making a little V out of a pallet, take two pallets and tie them together into a V and have that protect the plants. You can make a series of those. Now, I tried doing that with some pallets and the wind blew my pallets over. So it's going to take some working around to get it to the right place, and might need more reinforcement. Where I am too, I'm on rocks, so I can't pound posts in very far either. So if you can't relocate your corn, then it's a question of planting less of it, or again planting, trying to create a couple of windbreaks somehow. I've even seen people leave vehicles in the field to be a windbreak, like an old trash truck or something. People get very creative about some of that stuff. Piles of tires. Tires are easily available and they don't blow away. So, you could make a temporary, when it's not going to look pretty, you'd have to decorate it if you wanted to look pretty, but you could take a bunch of tires and stack them up in different places to make windbreaks. Because you don't need a solid wall. The wind still needs to move around. Corn is wind pollinated, so there needs to be some wind. And then it's in the timely, and then it's in the seeds. So even planting a little later, most of our winds are going to be hopefully done by early June.
Okay.
It hasn't been the same. So not planting as early, or planting like, again, that's when usually like people wouldn't plant until mid-May. So looking at that and then starting to save the seeds from the corn that is able to handle those conditions better, because that's something that is not being done as much or as specifically, is saving the seeds from year to year of the successful plants. Because that's how you build up that resilience of those plants, and not just getting new seed from somewhere. A lot of people will grow their seed, but they don't always save it. So that's something to consider if you're not doing that yet, to start really doing that more consistently.
Right. Okay. All right. Well, thank
Is
you,
that
Carol.
helpful? I mean, it's hard. And then, if you've got any relatives that want to build something, make them build it on the other side of the field so they provide a windbreak.
Right.
Somebody has to set up their shed, but yeah, it's tricky. Again, there are so many places around here that really weren't meant to be fields necessarily, and it's just where we're at now.
Okay. Well, thank you, Carol. I really appreciate it. That helped a lot.
Okay, so if you guys have some questions, you guys are more than welcome to unmute yourselves or type it in the chat box. But I have a question for you, Carol.
Yes.
So I'm gonna go past the growing season to um, harvesting, and I don't know what was going on with the squash, but it looked fine, on the outside. Picked it from the garden, and then went to prepare it, and the inside was nice, it was soft, but the skin was hard. So I don't know if it was too late harvested, or I don't know what was going on. So you could answer that question.
What kind of squash?
It was a long neck, a yellow squash, I guess.
Okay, you like
I
the
wasn't too
yellow
sure.
crooknecks and like this one that's usually
Yeah.
a summer squash. So those
Yes.
ones can get kind of a hard outside, and it just really depends on the variety, and it'll, the soil and the water can affect it. I've had some as well that are just really hard, and they're nice still on the inside, but the outside is like they might as well be a winter squash. And so that's something where, again, you might not want to plant that same kind next year. There are some similar ones, or this year. Um, there's a lot of different summer squash that aren't. The yellow crookneck tends to have issues, and it can be a really like a neon sign for squash bugs too. Sometimes they really love yellow squash, but the main thing is just to go ahead and peel and eat it. It's nothing that's wrong with the squash itself, but it is something that can happen based on um, other conditions that you really don't have a lot of control over all the time. So um, that is something that if you're going to save seeds from a summer squash like a yellow crookneck or a zucchini or something, that's where you want to have the squash have a hard shell, because then that allows the seeds inside more time to be mature. And zucchini, the green zucchini will do that too. If you have it for a while, it can get a really hard outside.
Right. Okay. Thank you, Carol. I believe, well, with the interest of time, if you guys got any questions, you could go ahead and email us. I'll show in the next slide how to contact us. But thank you again, Carol, for your presentation. I always enjoy your presentations and always learn something new every time. And I'm going to look at your presentation again and get some ideas on how to design the garden this year. So thank you, and thank you everyone for joining us this evening. So next week on Wednesday, we are going to have Daryl Yazzie from the Benet College Land Grant Office provide a presentation on garden soil amendments. And so I know Carol had mentioned it before about the livestock manure, adding it to your garden. When is a good time to add it? And so he's going to cover that, and then also some other pointers on amending your soil. So sorry, I got the screen up here. So join us next week. The Zoom information is there, and then also we'll have it posted on our Facebook page, and then also we finally got our website up and running, and you can find all the information there, our project information, and then also upcoming events. There'll be a lineup for the month of March on there, and there's a lot of information on their USDA programs, etc. And then also, if you would like to join our monthly newsletter, be a part of it, go ahead and email us there at nsaproject@nsu.edu, and we'll get you on the listserv. And then also what will be sent out along with newsletters is notification of upcoming webinars, and my information is there. And then also Kelly's information is there. And then also we have a vacant position. So if you're interested or know of anybody that might be interested, go ahead and have them send us an email. And thank you for joining us, and thank you again, Carol, for your presentation. I'm going to go ahead and end it here. Have a great evening. The Navajo Sustainable Agriculture Project, or the NSA project in short, is a New Mexico Cooperative Extension Service initiative delivered in collaboration with the Net College Land Grant Office and Community Outreach and Patient Empowerment Program. So the program is funded by USDA's Outreach and Assistance for Socially Disadvantaged Farmers and Ranchers and Veteran Farmers and Ranchers program. We currently have two field staff out in the field. Myself, Jesse Jim. Sorry, I didn't introduce myself. I am the field coordinator for the NSA project, and then we also have Kale Lantana, who is our field specialist. So we're out here covering Eastern and Northern Navajo agencies. We do have a couple of goals, 3 goals that we are going to accomplish with our program. And the first one, as you guys can see on the screen, is to improve the operations, profitability, sustainability of socially disadvantaged Navajo farmers and ranchers, and veteran farmers and ranchers, and then also increasing our Navajo farmers and ranchers' knowledge of the use of USDA programs such as NRCS, FSA, Rural Development, Risk Management Agency programs and services, and other resource providers. And lastly, we are increasing the local production and consumption of fresh fruits and vegetables and healthy food by Navajo families and individuals. Okay,